Revere POV. Riding Drake back was certainly quite the experience. The wind coursing through her hair was unlike anything else she had ever felt. Though despite that, the feeling that rushed through Revere's mind as Vidmori's mountain was now on the horizon gave her an almost nostalgic sensation, like coming home, strangely enough. She chalked that up to the influence Vidmori's memories had on her, as well as the bond she shared with him. She would be lying to herself if she said she wasn't excited to see Vidmori again, if not to discuss his old world and the many devices and inventions she saw before and after the apocalypse got started. The academic in her simply eager to tap into the wholly unknown source of knowledge. Well, not entirely unknown. She glanced back at Empress Historietta. She knew many things about the world Vidmori came from, but also seemingly came from a time before the apocalypse. It makes Revere wonder how much of the Empire's changes and improvements came from the Empress herself. She knew Ferodius to be a good man with good character while he was growing up, so she supposed it was a combination of good morals and new ideas that led to the current state of the Empire. Her musings were interrupted as she felt the Drake Warden she was riding with suddenly stiffen and pull on the reins of her Drake as she halted the flight. Looking around, Revere noticed that a swarm of birds had risen from the forest below them, forcing the Drake Wardens to stop unless they flew right through them. In the next moment, a rather grand-looking sparrow with green eyes broke from the flock, wearing a distinct red bandana around its neck, flying in front of the flight of Drake Wardens and speaking out, his voice no doubt enhanced by some kind of magic. "Well, where do you all think you're going? This land and air is a protected place. It is only fair that I'll have to warn you all that if you even think about flying any further, you'll have to face the might of me, Jack the Sparrow," he declared with a considerable amount of bravado. Even though Revere could recognize the bird, Jack, as a vassal of Vidmori, she hadn't met him before. The moment felt tense as a couple of seconds dragged on. That is, until the Empress broke into a fit of laughter, almost uncontrollably, as she covered her mouth but couldn't stop. The bird seemingly looked rather offended as he flitted past the drakes and up to the Empress, her Drake Warden rearing up and attempting to defend her. However, Jack stopped short as he hovered in front of the Empress. "Is there something funny about my name?" he asked seriously. The Empress still laughed a little more as she seemed to note the red bandana the bird wore. "Of course not. In fact, I know of you. You're quite possibly the finest bird I've ever heard of," she explained, still smiling widely. This seemed to appease the bird, as he flitted back to give the woman a little space. "Ah, so you have heard of me," he gushed, immensely enjoying the stroke to his ego. He looked around some more, first spotting Rionim and then Revere. "Oh, it's you and you. I have no idea who you are, but you're marked by Vidmori, so you must be one of us," he mentioned, closing his eyes and going quiet for a moment, as everyone seemed to relax. "All right. If you all will follow me, you may land at the haven. There is a clearing there that should be able to accommodate all your beasties," he explained, as the swarm of birds dispersed. All the while Jack made his way to the front of the flight of drakes, and began leading everyone down. As they began making their descent, Revere suddenly felt a presence in her mind as a voice called out to her. "So, I take it your meeting with the Emperor went well?" Vidmori asks, a pleasant feeling in his thoughts showing her that he seems to be in a good mood. Smiling to herself, Revere focused her mind before thinking back to him. "It went exceedingly well, Vidmori. The Emperor wishes to forge an alliance of equals with you. However, the biggest news I have is that I found someone from your world who would like to meet you. The Empress Historietta lived on Earth before dying and being reborn in our world," she thought excitedly, feeling rather proud to have helped facilitate the meeting between the two powerful people. Much to her confusion, though, Vidmori doesn't respond right away. and she could feel the thoughts of uncertainty and confusion swirling around before a response finally came through. Impossible. I am the only one from my world. The being responsible for bringing me here explained as much. Revere blanched at that piece of information. The idea that there are beings able to place someone as powerful as Vidmori into this world, and the realization that there is not only one other world aside from her own, but even more worlds that she likely will ever know about. She cast a curious glance back at the Empress, but before she could say anything in response, Vidmori continued. Don't say anything to her about it. She either knows this information and is lying about it, or she doesn't know and is not as informed about our circumstances as strangers to this world. I want to get a better read on her before revealing anything like that. Revere nodded to herself, suddenly feeling more than a little anxious about what she had done, as she avoided glancing back at the Empress again. Soon enough, they touched down in the clearing, with a strange-looking but impressive building. She quickly recognizes the people to be the imprisoned people from the carts all those weeks ago. They seem to be doing rather well for themselves, despite living in these desolate woods. However, she considers that the land is perhaps not as desolate as it was anymore, considering Vidmori's influence. She hopped off the drake once they landed, stretching her legs as she watched a copper-scaled lizardkin approach, soon walking up to her as he flashed a toothy smile. Welcome back, Mage Revere. It is a great pleasure to see you again, he enthused, bowing his head respectfully. The confusion must have been evident on her face, as the copper scale began chuckling with amusement as he gestured to himself. Oh, come now, you surely recognize me. I'm Zassatir. Have I changed that much? He teased knowingly, as he chuckled some more. You're the young elder. I suppose the description certainly suits you now, she exclaimed with surprise as she looked over the man, remembering the brown-scaled, battered lizardkin in rags. He still looked pleased by surprising her, his voice filled with mirth as he continued. Yes, Vidmori has done quite a lot for me and the community as a whole. I'll say, Revere replied simply, as she looked over the shepherd with new appreciation, as well as the rest of the area, as she remembered the last time she saw him in this place. However, her pointed ears twitched as she sensed the Empress approaching from behind, stepping to the side as she glanced at Zassatir, before looking at the Empress. Shepherd Zassatir, this is Empress Historietta. She has come as a representative of the Empire, to form an alliance of equals with Vidmori. The shepherd bows his head respectfully to the woman. Vidmori has made me aware of your arrival after Jack encountered your group, he mentioned, before looking over at the group of people and drakes. You may use our cooking facilities which are inside, though I'm afraid we simply don't have the room to keep everyone in the longhouse, but you are free to set up camp in the rest of the clearing for the duration of your stay, Zassatir explained outright, before the Empress got to make her introduction. The Empress smiled politely as she looked up at the lizardkin. Thank you for allowing us to set up so close. I promise that my people shall not trouble you during our stay. I'll actually advise them to help out where they can, if you allow them to, since we're the ones to have arrived without advance notice, she offered, before glancing over to Revere. If it's all right, might we visit Vidmori right now? We can do the official stuff later. I'd just like to meet him, you know, earthling to earthling, she mused almost conspiratorially to Revere, placing her hand on the elf's shoulder encouragingly. Zassatir watches curiously, having obviously overheard the whole exchange, but doesn't say anything. Revere wasn't sure what to say, though thankfully Vidmori spoke out within her mind. Go ahead. It's better to get this over with sooner rather than later. With that, Revere relaxed before flashing a smile in response. Sure, let us go, she offered, turning to look back at the Empress before gesturing for her to follow. Though as they moved to leave, some of the Drake Wardens moved to follow, Rionim taking his place beside Revere. Revere sounds out hesitantly. Historietta seemed to pick up on the hint, as she looked to the Drake Wardens, as well as the ladies in waiting, who noticed her starting to walk off. Don't worry. Start setting up the camp for my return. The head of the settlement has granted us permission to stay on the land, and we also have permission to use their cooking facilities. So let's get dinner going, she said, with a measured amount of enthusiasm, though she then had an idea as she clapped her hands together. Actually, let's make it more of a feast. Some of you go out and bring in some more meat for the meal and break into some of the goods we brought for more variety, she exclaimed. While they do look hesitant for a moment, they now had their orders as the group broke off, going about setting up camp and preparing for tonight's dinner. With that, Historietta looked back to Revere and smiled. There we go, now we'll have privacy, she mentioned with a mischievous smile, before allowing her eyes to wander the safe haven. Oh, that looks a lot like one of those Viking longhouses, minus the obvious ship being the roof, she commented thoughtfully as they walked. Revere gives a little nod, though she starts walking, heading towards the mountain. Though she does catch sight of some of the prowler cubs among the camp, smiling to herself at how much they have grown. They walk through the woods for some time, Revere actively sensing birds here and there, as they seemingly watch over them. Honestly, she was rather impressed by the massive network of mana beasts patrolling the land, though even with that, she was surprised by the Spitterwolf casually crossing their path, the wolf taking a moment to silently acknowledge the trio before continuing on its way. However, what really shocked her was when she entered Vidmori's territory, not expecting to cross the threshold so soon, as she took a step back with wide eyes. "What's the matter?" Historietta asked, glancing over at her and at Rionim, who also seemed to be somewhat surprised but remained rather stoic about it. Revere looked on in awe before clearing her throat as she looked over at the Empress. Nothing, it's just... The last time I was here, Vidmori's influence only properly extended out to less than half the mountain. Now he can influence the area from around here and further below the ground, she explained honestly, as she gestured to the ground, drawing an imaginary line with her finger. Historietta let out a low whistle, impressed but not fully understanding the implications. Wow, that is a big jump, she mentioned with a nod. Revere didn't say much else, though she soon found the staircase which leads up the mountain, once again vaguely surprised to see it all the way down here now, as they began their ascent. Before long, they were at the triangular entrance which led into Vidmori's chamber, the entrance growing and opening wider for Rionim as the trio entered. Before them was Vidmori himself, and once more, Revere was surprised to see the development, the core before her being 3 or 4 times bigger than when she saw it last. Not only that, a massive Spitterwolf was resting beside the new, lower pedestal. In front of the pedestal and on the steps was Basti, looking even more ferocious and majestic than before. And finally, on the other side of the core was a Birkin woman, another mage at that. Their eyes meet simultaneously, the Birkin looking just as surprised to see Revere as Revere was to see her, the two of them recognizing each other as beings in service to Vidmori. Before anyone could say anything, Historietta approached, looking over the big Spitterwolf and smiling in delight. "What a handsome-looking wolf!" she exclaimed, as she clapped her hands together. "Don't tell me, is his name Sif?" she asked, looking over at Vidmori's core. Vidmori was silent for a moment before responding. "No, his name is Lugosi," he spoke out, so the whole group could hear him. The Empress seemed to smile some more. "Ah, more of a manga fan than video games, she mentioned, approaching the Spitterwolf, who seemed somewhat confused. "I'm neither. My beloved really liked manga, and he reminded me of one of the stories she told me about," Vidmori explained, once again feeling confused about the woman's reaction. It seemed the Empress caught herself, having stopped halfway from reaching out to Dote and Lugosi, who looked anxious but in no ways hostile. She pulled back, making her way over beside Revere once again. "Forgive me. I suppose I was just so excited to meet someone from Earth like me. It's been decades since I could probably talk to anyone about anything," she explained, sounding and looking rather sincere as she lowered her head. I've been wanting to chat with you so much that I, completely forgot myself. Her demeanour almost entirely shifted from the careful and poised, yet mischievous and charming Empress that Revere had watched grow up and live around Ferodius in the last decade. She almost seemed like a completely average woman. Vidmore seemed to process this for a moment before replying. I know how you feel, though I'm afraid an old man like me won't make for great conversation about the things you might be familiar with, he explained, feeling genuinely apologetic about that. Historietta seemed to realize another faux pas that she just made before nodding her head. Right, of course. You went through quite a lot, didn't you? I'd say I'm rather lucky to have died young before the apocalypse happened. I don't think I would have ever made it into that kind of life. I died as a college student in my 20s. How old were you? She asked, her mood now entirely sombre, as she looked at the core curiously. Vidmore took some time to think about it, but after a little while longer, he responded. I lost track after the first couple of decades. I was probably in my late 40s, early 50s, though I was 19 when it all went down, he explained. Historietta nodded intently as she listened, though it seemed her gaze was directed at something else, when she suddenly looked rather surprised. Whoa! What's with all those titles? There's so many. I've only got 3. Holy crap! You've got a kill count of over 3,000. That's amazing, she said, seemingly reading off of something. What are you doing? How do you know all that? Vidmore asked, as everyone seemed to watch Historietta with confusion. However, it was now Historietta's turn to be confused, though she did look apologetic. Sorry, I should have asked, but I figured you were already examining my profile in the status window anyhow. Vidmore was silent for a time, though the confusion was plain in his thoughts. Status window? What are you talking about? Historietta slightly tilted her head at that. You know, the status window you can access through the system. It allows you to manage your growth, track your abilities, and study others in numerical detail, among other things. You do have a system, right? She asked, suddenly feeling a little hesitant.